Okay, good afternoon, everybody here and also following our webcast. In our last Foresight session, we actually had more people following us in the webcast that were in the room, and I suspect that today might be the same case. My name is Ulla Rosenström, and I will chair this session. Before introducing our distinguished speaker today, Professor Jerome Glenn, I will say a few words about what is Foresight Friday and the government point of view on this. As we all know, Finland is very well known for our high-level future studies, and there are many well-known people for that and research. And when I travel abroad, I often get very many compliments on the future studies that we do. And of course, the Future Studies Center, who is organizing this conference, has been real forerunner for Finland and for making Finland known on this. And I am very happy about being able to organize our Foresight Friday here during this event. So our event in your event. So thank you for that. Finland is also pretty famous for our unique Parliament Committee for the Future that brings future-oriented things and thinking to the Parliament and to the politicians. And in fact, today's theme, these new jobs, is something that our previous Committee for the Future named as one of the most important things that the new government, the next government, the government that we now have, should tackle. And therefore, like I said last week, I will also now make a promise that I will try to take inputs and insights and discussion and points that we get today to the Prime Minister. So I hope that I can fill the promise. But besides the scientists and the politicians, we have many practitioners and civil servants who work with the foresight issues in Finland. However, we're quite dispersed because Finland is a big country. And so we have foresight happening in many places. And therefore, about a year ago, we decided and launched a project from the Prime Minister or within the Prime Minister's office, which we call it a new approach to the foresight work in Finland. And the point is to connect Finnish foresight people. And the key word here is sharing and doing together. We want to share ideas through meeting each other, both in the meetings and in the place, and also virtually in the web. So far, we have connected over 300 foresight people in our web, in this Yammer site that we have. And we call this community who have joined this Yammer. So anybody can join, please. If somebody's not there yet, please come. It's yammer.com/ennakointi. So you should join us. And we call this group of people the National Foresight Network. And its work, it's facilitated jointly by Prime Minister's Office and Sitra. So Ernesto Hartikainen is sitting here in the front row. And then he's usually also part of these Foresight Friday events. And to keep the network active, we have created this Foresight Friday concept, which works as an umbrella for all the activities that we do. So these Foresight Fridays, this is the third Foresight Friday that we organize. So this can contain debates, lectures, as we have today, especially with this international speaker, or it can be training, and we're actually planning some training together with the Future Center to be offered to our network members. And also it can be something as working together, as we have done those future images that were actually yesterday showed at the poster session. So if you haven't seen them, you could still check them out in this afternoon. It's a work that we did together for the parliamentary elections to make the politicians think more future-oriented, more in the long term. And actually, those who have seen the new government program will see that they actually did think more in the longer term. So there is this vision for Finland in 2050. But let me now introduce our Professor Jerome Glenn. I suppose many of you already know him very well, but I just want to say that he is the co-founder of the Millennium project, and he has over 35 years of futures research experience working for governments, international organizations, and also private industry. And besides co-authoring the annual State of the Future Millennium project for the past 12 years, he has also published over 100 papers and articles on a very distinguished journals. So we're very honored and pleased to have you here with us. And the title of your presentation is Dynamic Futures, Work and Technology Alternatives to 2050, and you have the same title on your presentation, so I was briefed well. So what we will do is we will now hear a presentation for about 45 minutes. I trust you keep it, so I'm not going to interrupt you.
You can.
Well, okay, if you go really, really long, because we do want to discuss, because that's what we do in the Foresight Fridays that we discuss. So after your presentation, we will have a immediate clarifications and ask questions and then go more into detail, and I will give more directions at that point.
Good.
But let's now welcome Jerome.
Thank you. Good afternoon to those here and those not here. The Millennium Project, for those that you don't know, is a global participatory think tank. We have, you can't hear them? Yeah, you can. Okay, you can hear in the back, yes? Okay, good. All right. We have 56 now nodes around the world. These are, and there's one here in Finland, of course, and these nodes select people to answer questionnaires and participate in research around the world, because you can't know enough of who to pick around the world unless you have some sort of representation. So on this study that I'll talk about on the future of work and technology, Finland node here, the Helsinki node, identified people to respond in the questionnaire. And I will say later, but in case I forget, Finland was number 2 in the world. The respondents, we had, I don't know, 50, 60, 70 countries or whatever, but Finland was tied for second in respondents. The United States was first, Finland was second, tied with Mexico and I think Canada. So congratulations for brain picking. So this is basically a brain picking system. So we're not doing sociology, we're not doing statistical relevant samples. What we're trying to do is get the best thinking and bring it together, then feed it back to the world. Okay, technology is affecting the future of work. The obvious things are synthetic biology, artificial intelligence. Artificial general intelligence is less well understood. Artificial general intelligence can create its own goals and learn from feedback systems independent of human beings. So that becomes an intelligent species. We haven't run into that yet. Robotic manufacturing, computational science, nanotechnology, quantum computing. Quantum computing, for those that don't follow that, there's been some major breakthroughs in the last year, so that the forecast on when we may be able to have that capability is going to be a little sooner than we originally thought. Tele-everything, tele-everybody, semantic web, augmented reality, telepresence, holographics, drones, increasing individual and collective intelligence, 3D and 4D printing, new synergies among all of these things, and conscious technology. The inevitability of new economics seems to come out of this. One, you've got concentration of wealth is increasing, and all the factors that are increasing that technology or that wealth concentration are continuing. So there's no reason to assume it won't continue. Obviously, the society will not accept that forever, so something has got to change at some point. Income gaps are getting wider as well. Employmentless growth seems to be a new norm, according to the World Bank and others. Return on investment is higher on capital and technology than it is on labor. So if you've got all this extra cash, it's not necessarily going into employment. Future technologies can replace just about every repetitive behavior of human beings. An awful lot of what we do is repetitive. Long-term structural unemployment is business as usual forecast. Synthetic biology is not like your normal DNA affecting one part. If you change the color of a rose from red to green, you've done a little engineering, but it's still a rose. Synthetic biology is where you're creating species that never existed before. You're taking a little bit of DNA capabilities from completely different species and putting them into new combinations to make life forms that have never been done before. The estimates I've seen from people, I think, are in this study so far, are way understated what I think will happen. Because as Mr. Vinter says, we'll be able to write genetic code like we write computer code. Now think about the early days of computers. If you had said that millions of people would write their own applications and sell them around the world, that would have sound a little bit outrageous. But imagine the same thing for biology. Creating thousands and thousands of life forms to do all kinds of things, from cleaning the plaque out of your brain so you don't become senile. or changing plants so they produce hydrogen instead of oxygen. These things are in process. Artificial general intelligence, or superintelligence, there's different names for it, can autonomously write its own code and responding to feedback on worldwide networks. As we have the idea of big data and we've got the idea of the Internet of Things, that means an artificial intelligence can learn from the entire world simultaneously all the time and rewrite its code based upon that constantly. You can't do that yet. At least I can't do it. So it's going to be pretty hard to beat them. They learn faster, feedback faster, and global reproduction perfect. We don't have perfect reproductions, and we take a long time to reproduce. So that's going to be a lot faster than Moore's Law, and we already know what Moore's Law did to the world. Even things like farming, look at that, and absolutely everything there is automated. You got 1 billion farmers, you got 270 million farms today, an awful lot of that can be automated. So we're not just looking at manufacturing automation, I mean across the board. Almost anything is repetitive, think of that. Everything is repetitive is possible. Now this is supposed to be futuristic, but it may be doomed very soon. Because with 3D printing and nanorobotics and AI, this kind of printing of reproduction of machinery may look quite obsolete coming up sooner than we think. So if we got all this investment into robotic infrastructure worldwide, it may become obsolete faster than we think. This is one that's hard for me to believe, but you all can check this out. Hewlett-Packard has developed a device now that's on 3D. You know, the old 3D printing was a plastic sort of thing, made your little chess pieces and so forth, right? This isn't that. This is many different materials, and it can spray 3 or 30 million drops a second in 1 square inch. I can't understand that myself. I really can't. I'm trying to understand it. But the precision of that kind of printing, and that's supposed to be commercially available starting in 2016, next year. Well, what's that going to be like in 2020, 2040, 2050? One of the exercises I would suggest to all of you is to list down what technologies or ideas that you think are about in the future, and then repeat them across the top, and then do a little matrix and say, if nanotechnology occurs, how will that change synthetic biology? Because we all know technology is integrated. You know, your cell phone is a camera, it's a flashlight, it's an alarm clock, you know, as well as a telephone, right? So if so for a phone, what about for all kinds of future technologies? They will interact. How will synthetic biology and nanotech work? How will artificial intelligence write computer code independently of you writing computer code? Not only its own software code, but biological code. These are plausible things that we have to think about seriously, and the sooner the better. So, will synergies among AI, or artificial intelligence, robotics, and synthetic biology and quantum computing, will it create more jobs than it eliminates? It might. It might, but a lot of people are saying it might not. And if it might not, we got to think about it. We're doing a study right now. It's an 8-part study. The first part, as you would expect, would be a literature search to see what other people have already said. And then that literature search produced a real-time Delphi, which is just finished. And I'm giving you the preliminary results of that. I'm not finished reading everything. One of the surprises on this study, usually when you have a Delphi questionnaire, you have certain things you put in numbers and you have some explanation. And it's usually like 1 to 5, 1 to 10. So like people will all do the numbers, but they won't write something in. This ratio of numbers to comments was probably about 80%. It's the highest I've ever seen, which means a lot of people got a lot to say. There's a lot of uncertainty here. Then after that, if all goes well, we'll produce some roadmaps and scenario drafts. Then those will be sent out again to people to get feedback on those scenarios. You'll all be invited in that through your note here. And then we'll produce final scenarios with policy implications and produce an initial report. That will be available then back to the nodes around the world, who then hopefully will organize planning workshops, for example, here in Finland. So like based upon all that sort of stuff, so what for Finland? So it becomes very precise. What do we do? What legislation, what education, what kind of roles, what kind of laws, how are we going to address all this sort of stuff? Then the Millennium Project will take the results of those planning workshops around the world, put that together, and to see what that says as a whole for us. Then that becomes the final report. So this is a long, drawn-out process. Then that'll be made available to the world to discuss. So the real-time Delphi had 400 participants, over 1,000 comments, And it was like something like 180 pages of stuff I'm still reading as of about an hour ago or an hour and a half ago. I'm still reading all this sort of stuff. North America had the most, 143, but Europe had 138. Latin America, you can see down the list there, the participants. This is the first time I've ever seen this, the statistics of universities and business being exactly the same. I went through the numbers. It just turned out to be that way. Think tanks were the third, independent consultants and writers, and you can see the rest of it there. The age group mostly were between 46 and 60, and the second largest group was between 30 and 45. We also asked the question, how much experience do you have in futures thinking? Because we want to be able to say, if they've got a lot of experience in futures thinking, what do you say? You don't have a lot of experience, what do you say? Same with artificial intelligence and so forth. But most of them were middle, about 179 futurists who consider themselves pretty good, but not top experts. But 120 consider themselves top experts. So it's a dense study of futures thinking. Here you can see the list again. The PowerPoint, I assume, will be made available along with the whole thing, so I don't have to read all of that. So what did we ask? First, we asked people if, it's the old classic stuff, if current trends continue, we don't change all the things that we may have to change, how will unemployment look by 2050? What will it look like in 2020, 2030, 2040, and 2050? Tons of responses written on this. Two, what are the factors, technological factors, that we're really going to make the difference, that we have to pay attention to? And what questions have to be resolved in order to answer the question, is it going to create more work or is it going to create less work? What do we got to answer first before we even answer that question? And how likely and effective are certain actions to address the situation? Will wealth continue to accumulate to the very, very few? The income gaps continue to increase? If so, will we have to have some sort of guaranteed annual income? And how might that be put together? How is it done? The cost of living may very well be a lot less than it is today in 2050. Because if you, in fact, can have artificial biology create all kinds of life forms doing certain things you couldn't do before, even with software, but it's replicating very fast, then the unit of production cost should go down. Same with 3D printing and all the rest of these sort of things. So there's a reason to believe that the cost of living may be a lot lower than we think in 2050. So the amount of money for people to have a basic income may not be as much as we have considered today. It's another factor to consider. What other surprises, what black swans, what ideas out there were going to change this whole situation? And then what do you think about the scenario axes and any other comments? So that was the questionnaire, essentially. The unemployment, all averaged together, looks like 24% according to this study. There are some irregularities in this because some people would say, well, you won't have unemployment in a regular way, so unemployment's really zero. Well, that's also like saying by the conventional definition, it's 100. So, but the main thing to take away from here is basically many world leaders of future stuff says it's going up. All right, so we don't have to quibble about how much. The thing is, it's going up, and even if it's only 24% by the old assumptions, that's enough for world instability. I mean, that's 1 out of every 4 person, 25% of the world unemployed. You can't run a civilization too easily like that unless you make some changes in society and economics. I was surprised. Europe's usually more pessimistic than North America. What's happened? You're the less pessimistic about. Maybe you've had so much experience with unemployment in Spain and Greece that you figure, hey, no big deal. We know about this thing. We can survive. North America was the most nervous about this. But then the pattern is the same. It's going up every year. The artificial intelligence experts were more nervous about this than the non-artificial intelligence experts, except toward the end. But that's a little anomaly I got to double check. It could very well be that they figured by 2050, humanity would finally wake up, and then they wouldn't be worrying about unemployment. We'll see. If I took just artificial intelligence plus other technical capabilities, then that pattern continues out. The red line is all of artificial intelligence, and the other one is just the others. So you can see that those people studying these questions, they're the ones that see it happening faster than others. Same with futurists. Take a look at that, the top one there. By 2050, the futurists with the three variables there is futurists with high experience, middle experience, and low experience. And you'll notice those who have less experience in futures research don't see it as a big a deal. And those that do have a lot of experience see it as a big deal. So there's some education to go on. The gender wasn't too much different. By the way, I did not pick out this graphics. This was done, if Elizabeth is listening to this on a streaming video by a director of research, she did this. So it's making the woman look smaller on this thing, which shouldn't be the case. But in any case, but you'll notice the numbers are about the same. So it's not really a gender issue so much. Some of the comments, I mean, there's about 180 pages, so I'm not going to be able to give you the flavor of that. One of the things I think we will do with our nodes is to do open source research analysis. In other words, we may make the spreadsheets available and all this sort of data for people to do different analysis. There's an awful lot of stuff to do, and it's an important thing to get right. Anyway, so one is very clear throughout a lot of the comments is the concept of employment is going to change. The idea of you going over there, applying for a job, and making a living, earning a living that way, that concept will change. Not for everybody necessarily, but will change enough that by 2050 we're talking about something that's different. Others will say, no, we will be creative and adapt, right? I mean, you know, the Industrial Revolution created more jobs than it replaced. The Information Age created more jobs than it replaced. Well, you know, we'll do it again. That might be the case. However, this time the speed of change is faster than ever before, and the interdependency is faster than ever before. And unlike the Industrial Revolution and the Information Revolution, there were no plateaus in the Intelligence Revolution. In other words, like for example, we've been using laptops for over 15 years, right? In the Industrial Revolution, an awful lot of the machinery we've been doing 20 to 30 years. You're going to have some progress and then a plateau, and progress and a plateau. We think with artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, and the rest of these things, they may never plateau, at least not by 2050. So as a result, you never have a chance to, quote, catch up. Tech unemployment will accelerate when AI masters how to see and how to learn. When those two variables, we're not quite there yet. Some of it's going on, as you know. But when it can really see and differentiate like we do, and it can learning on how to learn, then those two things will speed up artificial intelligence faster. So some people forecast, including myself, you'll have a growth up to 2040, but around 2040, 2050, it starts to accelerate faster than we think. Everything that can be automated will be automated, so start thinking about this quickly. Tech augmentation is another variable, is we may not have to be replaced if we augment. In other words, if you create symbiosis, you grow together with a thing. So no matter how well it does, you're doing well with it. Another approach. Some people say, well, we'll just have 30-hour work weeks, we'll have telework and so forth. Yeah, but all those things could still be automated. So instead of sharing work, you may be sharing unemployment. Unemployment in richer countries, but poor, will go faster than the poorer countries because it will not be an even change, obviously. Just like the internet, you can see how the internet grew around the world, but it didn't grow in a lockstep way. And as I mentioned, no plateaus for human labor to catch up. Some people argue that we're going to have some big mega projects to pull humanity together into its next step. Climate change, space programs, and so some mega projects to take us to the next step. Others talked about being free, liberating the human spirit. If you don't have the tyranny, like those students here at the university, they're a little nervous about, well, I'm not finished the degree, I got to go out and I got to get a job. If I don't get a job, I can't have my apartment. I got to earn a living. Oh my God, this tyranny. Well, that tyranny may be gone in 2050. The idea of earning a living, the idea that you have that. So if you're able to have your basic life support systems taken care of, then you're freer to think, freer to be creative. Western historians tell us that philosophy came out of the leisurely priestly caste in Egypt, according to Diotima and Socrates and Plato. If that's true, what happens if 2050 you have a world leisurely priestly caste? But unlike the Egyptian priestly caste, you might be augmented geniuses. and interconnected. As far as I know, the leisurely priestly caste in Cairo was not in touch with the Incas. Incas weren't there too much at that time. But now we're talking about a totally integrated world and potentially augmented genius intelligence. I have not perfect 2020 vision. I am now augmented 2020 vision. My brain has been altered by this augmentation. Can I also do this with artificial intelligence in the future? Can I augment myself to be a genius? I see no reason that that's not possible. So that leisurely priestly caste in Egypt giving birth to a lot of stuff, imagine what creativity is possible by 2050 when you have 9.6 billion people and they're potentially augmented geniuses. So self-fulfillment, self-actualization is maybe the most important product to pursue in the future. This is a list of ratings on which technologies would replace work the fastest over time. Obviously, you got robotics, but the second one is, I think, an interesting one. It's the synergies of these technologies that's going to be interesting. Just again, think of your smart telephone. Synergies gets to be interesting, not just single functions. Some of the questions that, or sort of comments on these questions, what we did is we said, rate these things with numbers. Explain your numbers, and then explain your explanation. So there's a two-step process on content here. One of the ones is we've never had to deal with a second intelligent species. You know, we've always been the smartest species on the block. We could outthink the lion. We may not be able to outthink the next thing. How are we going to relate to that? How's that going to change philosophy? How's that going to change law? How's it going to change a lot of stuff? Another question was, what are the factors creating more jobs and preventing mass unemployment? Well, one, rated the highest, was new economic systems and new work concepts. That's the thing that's really got to be focused on to address this. Others said, no, not necessarily. Self-employment, freelancing, do-it-yourself. We might be able to actually create all kinds of income because, after all, if you're surrounded by the internet, I mean, the old information revolution, remember Copernicus had, the old idea was the Earth was the center and the sun revolved around. Copernicus said, no, it's the other way around, right? So revolution in that sense was you're changing the center to the orbit. So in the old days, the market was the center, and people literally revolved around that physical location. You had to walk to the market. Now with the internet, you're the center, and every single other person is the center too, and the whole world revolves around it. That's a different concept. We have not been teaching people to make a living on finding markets for their own self, their own creativity, on a worldwide basis. The Millennium Project is that. Ted Gordon and I said, hey, this ought to be done. So we just found markets and created it. There was no request for proposal. I didn't even talk to the European Union before I did it. And that idea of self-creating may become another way of addressing this. Some of those comments. One, we really got to look at the whole idea of worthwhile. Do we really want to have the tyranny of earning a living by having a job, working for somebody or some institution or whatever that doesn't really necessarily match our values? I mean, how many people get their avocation and their vocation together? You know, some people are working in jobs that they like. You're probably working in a job you like. You're lucky. Not everybody in the world is like you. So this is what is one of the alternatives here, is to sort of give you an idea as you touch the entire world as an individual. This list you can see later on, but basically the difficulty to create a business is completely different today. You can start a business and start selling product in one day. The cost of entry is so little. You can get a free website and you're in business. You know, you can use social networks to do your advertising at no cost. But when you think about what it cost to start a business, let's say 30 years ago, it's a completely different game. And furthermore, your market was much smaller area. Now you're talking about the world. So this is what it is. What one of those businesses look like today. What might that look like in 2030, 2040, 2050? Next question. What questions have to be resolved in order to answer the question whether AI and other technologies will create more jobs or work or not? Well, one, how intelligent can this stuff really be? It's really real here. So we've had some people speculating in the artificial intelligence labs, but we're not there yet. You know, how far can this really go? Because if it really can go, as some people think, then that's one consequence. If, on the other hand, turns out it's a lot more complex than we thought, and we can do a lot better, but it's not really the runaway general intelligence that we thought. Maybe, maybe not. And another question to ask, do we really want to have that job stuff? Do you really want to have that? Maybe you don't. Maybe you want to create your life every day. Begin in the morning and do curiosity pass through the future internet of 17.8 or whatever it happens to be at that point, and creating your life throughout that day and doing different things. And all of a sudden somebody says, hey, I'm interested in that. And then it can be an economic or a barter transfer. So you may actually be doing economics activities throughout the day, but the original motivation is self-fulfillment, self-actualization, and curiosity. Who's going to own artificial intelligence? If you make an artificial intelligence operation, and then it rewrites its code and creates offsprings, and they start to interact with artificial biology, and they create offsprings, and then there's an accident. Who's responsible? You know, if your child did something, it's one step removed. Well, with artificial intelligence, it could be so many steps removed, you can't answer the question easily. These are some legal stuff that's going to have to face. We don't know about that yet. And we also don't know about the idea of it's going to evolve in a good or bad way. Many of you have probably read the book Superintelligence by Nick Bostrom, whereas he says that the initial conditions of how the superintelligence evolves will determine whether it turns out to be the bad science fiction story or the good science fiction story. And and the bets are off on how do you know that you've done that right? And some of the AGI, artificial general intelligence people I talk with, are not sure about that. But it's a hot topic. How do you make sure the initial conditions evolve in the right way? We all know about planting a tree. You can plant a tree and you can push it so it grows a certain way. And you can plant it so it grows a different way. Artificial intelligence, general intelligence may be like that as well. How are you going to tax these things? How does finance work and all this sort of stuff? You know, like if you own this artificial intelligence program and it produces a nice product and you sell it, it's very clear, the relationship. But if the thing keeps reproducing beyond your control and understanding and it produces, who owns that? Do they have their own income? Well, how does that work? So there's all kinds of ethical questions here to consider. We've never had to consider before. And who's going to control these developments? Who's responsible for the mistakes? Are we going to become obsolete, or are we going to become just really smart people keeping abreast with this sort of stuff? Is it possible for us to be augmented geniuses, really? Next question. What are your thoughts about answers to that question? So this is like, you know, what are your thoughts on that? Again, it keeps slowly coming back to this idea that we may actually have an opportunity to have a marvelous civilization. It does not have to be the nightmare. But, according to the first question, the business as usual is the unemployment nightmare. But we're not there yet. We have time to think this through. How likely effective are some of these actions? This is interesting. There was no real sense of these are the right things to do and we all think that's right. The distribution curves were like almost flat. You had almost many times people saying this is no good as saying this is brilliant. We've not really thought through how to do it right. The scale here is 1 to 5. Nothing there was over 4. That's unusual in one of these kind of studies. Usually you have a couple things pop up like that. None of them popped up that much. Retraining. People says, yeah, okay, yeah, you can retrain, but artificial intelligence can learn faster than you can retrain. So what are you retraining for? Well, maybe you're retraining for understanding yourself and self-actualization. Well, that's a little different. It depends on what the retraining is. People say, well, you just require science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and coding. Sure. And I'm going to be able to beat artificial intelligence and self-coding? I don't think so. Maybe at first, but not for too long. But it's interesting. We don't have good answers here. Something to be thought through. This suggests additional actions. Now, there's 190 actions suggested, so there's a lot of thinking going out there, all right? It's just not, it hasn't been brought together well. A lot of thinking. One of the ones right off the top was, we've got to stop thinking of one-off solutions. There's no magic bullet here. This is a complex problem. We've got to talk about systemic changes in all kinds of stuff. We've got to teach critical thinking. We've got to accept that humans are no longer a job slot. We give you 5 skills, you walk into employment, and that's it. No, that's not likely to be in the future. You're going to be always learning all the time. Well, that we're on top of, and the world is beginning to accept that notion. Public money for public startups so that every individual can create their own activity. Massive investments into large-scale projects like climate change and space could be a whole new direction for us. We'll see. Set challenging objectives for society, because if you're going to have this leisurely, priestly caste of the human species, to what end? To what? To what? What's the purpose of life? These are the classical philosophical questions now become quite important. It's no longer an academic discipline in a university. It's something that everybody's got to think through, because what we think about, what we do this time really, really matters. You don't have to have a whole lot of genius in the agricultural age. You got too many geniuses, self-thinking people in the industrial age, you probably got a revolution anyway. But in this sense, you're going to have everybody much more. And that's a different condition for us. So, question comes up, do we have to have guaranteed annual income? Someone says, oh my God, that's communism, capital, all these sort of isms are going all over the place. Oh my God, we've gone through this, sort of waving their hands. Not necessarily. There's a lot of different ways to do this. But I want you to notice that half the respondents around the world, all kinds of different stripes and ideologies and all that sort of stuff, over half it said that it's either absolutely necessary to do this, or it's very important. That's the majority of the responses. And that's clearly the majority once you start throwing in, yes, it can help. So this is a specter in the future we have to consider how to do it in the right way. So how do you create a cash flow direction for this? If you say, okay, imagine going to the Congo and say, we want you to create a guaranteed income for everybody in the Congo. It's not very likely. Imagine going to Greece and saying, okay, you guys have your expenses right now, but we want you to have even more expenses, guaranteed income for everybody. That's not going to work. So how do you create a cash flow projection out to 2050 or 2040 on how this can go? You can license robots and you can tax them, just like you can license a car and you tax the car. And that money that comes in from that can help repair the roads. That's fair enough. Okay? Similar ideas can be done with all kinds of new technologies as well that might apply. Carbon tax has not been instituted in a really serious way around the world. That can produce a lot of income as well. Tobin tax, there are all kinds of financial transactions in airports going on. There's a lot of stuff that could be brought in income. Tax havens, got all kinds of tax havens. The amount of money in tax havens is so large that my mind doesn't even remember what the number is, but it's really large. It's a big factor in the world economy. A universal minimum corporate tax. You got all kinds of corporations. The United States is more guilty than probably anybody else. They're not paying any taxes. Why not have this guaranteed? No matter what you're doing, you got to have a certain amount here. Tax massive wealth growth. There's the idea that if you have accelerated growth, why can't some of that go back into what you're replacing? Now, the cost, as I mentioned before, of living may go down. So therefore, the cost of a guaranteed income strategy may not be as high as we think today. One, you can consolidate a lot of welfare programs. That should improve some efficiency. Two, AI, robotics, and the rest of these things should lower the cost of unit of production. So therefore, the cost of things, we keep hearing, I'll wait till next year where the cost comes down. That's sort of unique in history, So now we just expect the cost will come down. Well, how much can it come down? Can the cost of living come down quite a lot? Will there be enough of that extra income to make all the education, all the health, all that basic sort of stuff free? Factors to consider. Should we require national service or a minimum annual public service, in exchange for that? Can we phase in this idea into whatever next becomes, whatever that next is? Different incomes in different areas and countries. It's not going to be the same way. And can both work income and guaranteeing income, can these systems work together in some sort of way so that people don't say, well, it's not fair that I'm working and you're not, and you're having a good time on the beach and I'm not. So how does that all work out? Some initial generalizations. No actions to address these issues received high consensus. Implication meaning we futurists have got some work to do. Little understanding of the future of synthetic biology. A lot of understanding of artificial intelligence, but not incomparable with synthetic biology. Most understood that the world economic system and social systems are going to change by both government and market. That's as much of a consensus as we have. That people got clear. Plausible alternative cash flow projections for introduction of basic income are missing. I've not seen them. If anybody's got them, I want to know, I want to read them, I want to study them. Many of the respondents envisioned a better future for humanity, an end to the tyranny of jobs, and flourishing of pleasure of meaningful work. So the next steps in the study is to do the roadmaps, create the scenario drafts, create another real-time Delphi, get feedback on the scenarios, then take the policy implications out of the final scenarios and prepare a report and make that available for the workshops, get the results from those workshops around the world, and put it into a final discussion. So I thank you for your attention and happy to discuss this issue and share our mutual ignorance of it.
Thank you so much for this inspirational talk and to hear especially this focus on all over the world, kind of what the answers have been like. I can't help translating these things to Finland and thinking that, okay, we didn't really have philosophers past, in our history, because in Finland it's always been quite cold, and people are just busy fighting the snow and cold and wolves and bears and all that. So we haven't had so much time to take it easier. And I was just thinking, there was recently in the newspaper a story about a man who wanted to live without money. But did he try it in Finland? No, he traveled to Greece or some other southern. It's warmer. So here you really can't. So this question about translating this to Finland is something that kept going on in my mind. Okay, I'm now going to open the floor soon for discussion. But I was thinking as I realized that this is the most difficult moment and time of the week. It's Friday afternoon, it's right after lunch. So just to get everybody here going and with us, I would suggest that everybody looks to one on the other side of you and finds a partner or a group of three and talk for a few minutes about what this presentation brought into your mind, what kind of questions you might have for Jerome in a minute, or perhaps what does this mean for Finland? What could it mean for the Finnish government? What is the future? So and by doing this, we also give Jerome a small break here after your great speech. You went to 45 minutes though. So a few minutes of discussion, and then those behind the webcast, you can write your question or ideas to Twitter with the hashtag Foresight Friday, and I promise to read if there's anything and pass those questions on too. So please discuss.
Then I hope that the Prime Minister's will collaborate and know to do the workshop.
Yes.
Because the whole idea it's not official. You want to have like a go at it. But the idea is let's look at this for a few weeks. Think about it, and then come together over a 2-day whatever process, and actually go through it and how you cover the implications. Right? Take into account the rest of the world, and this is our then our job is to I'm sorry.
It's clear Foresight Friday.
Oh boy. Oh. Yeah. But then it's going to be exciting from my point. What do these different countries say? It's simple. And still obviously different countries. And will ideas in some countries transfer to other countries? Because Brazil proposed it by apply. So then we want to get all that together, then feed it back out. There's going to be some long process. It's not fun to do.
That I've heard about already before.
Well, we started this because we have an before we do that, think what's important to us. Walking the book, we already know major issues already gone back. And this study was and when we do that,
Even if we don't get funding, we'll. That's why everybody's volunteering.
That is all. But nevertheless,
well, that's okay. Maybe somebody listening to the audience
will want to
we
fund you.
can use a donation, folks.
Yes. But nevertheless, as I see, more natural for us is to say support the workshop and then take part in those.
Yeah. And you can also shape the agenda and say, okay, we've read this report. Over here, no problem. Over here, no problem. But no, that you've got to change legislation. This is a difficult. So then, since you can get some, feedback to the group from the administrative point of view, because if it's going to be done, it's got to be done. And not only one, but obviously that's through time administration.
And nevertheless, our also priority, if we look at what we want to do with this national near future, it is that we want to build national. Basically, the state secretary was saying that we have to not an island.
Right.
Have to.
Yeah, that's what we want to feedback all the stuff too. So you'll get the results. I mean, on that workshop, the results.
Finished 14 and get to start.
You're right. That's right. Sometimes it's a conversation. I mean, answering questions, because then a lot of times people have in mind something that I misspoke, or they had a mindset, and that question exposes that.
Yeah, I think it would be easier for them than to share. They can always say, they don't have to say that this is a thing that's important. They can say that per se, and then they do recycle. A few people are really tired, but not just so, I just really felt like it. And then you made also point of the Foresight Friday that people had to compete with maybe somebody that they don't know.
Now, do they have a hashtag or something? Questions coming or how's that?
Yeah, I mean, we usually have this thing, but I realized that yeah.
Do you have anybody, can you tell how many are?
I think like 20, so not as many as possible. So we have a hashtag #FFSite Friday that we use. So. Now people are just
what?
No, it's just some tweets.
Comments?
No comments.
Clear tweets. We're outside. Yeah. Yeah, you got the person premier. First time I didn't finish with my homework. First time I noticed stuff. Not finished. I've got something about 50 PowerPoint racks, stuff like people with a science background show up this way versus somebody with a non-science background. All that I haven't had a chance back to test it.
Most probably will also now you can get.
Yes.
Yes. 1 minute. Okay, everybody. Can we now? It's wonderful how I see that you're really, I see burning to talk with each other. So I think now it's time to share your thoughts with us. And we don't have a microphone that would go around the audience. So that means that we're going to repeat your questions in some form. Of course, if there are comments, then it's a little bit more tricky to repeat the comments. But the fact is that at those, we do have quite a few people following us behind the webcast, but they're not going to hear us.
Joo, itse asiassa voidaan käyttää tätä, jos vaan.
Okay. Okay, so there is a technology for this.
But I'm not sure if the people following the webcast are going to hear what you say in the mic. So please repeat the question.
Okay.
All right. But nevertheless, let's open the floor for comments and questions and then see how it goes. Please, who would like to share with us what you were just talking with your neighbor?
We were, by the way.
Yeah, I don't mind. Actually, I would like to know who you are when you start speaking. Thank you.
We were talking about the speed of change, talking about the speed of development of AI, and perhaps questioning there's a risk once computers are smarter than we are, then they can reproduce themselves quicker than we could keep up. So there's a question of governance and the rule system that's required for the development of AI to protect the human species from robot species. But the development of automation, I think, is more insidious, and it will. I would agree, that we would agree, and we all agree, that it will change the nature of what's valued. So at the moment, work is a virtue. It's one of the virtues that we get, and we're rewarded for that activity. If you don't work, it's seen as not virtuous, largely, whatever the reason. So maybe a question to the Millennium nodes is, what will be taken as virtue in 2050? And how would that be valued and rewarded? Because that's at the core of human endeavor and activity.
That's right.
So that's the kind of thing we would think.
Can I take a few more?
Yeah.
Okay, can we have a few more comments, questions before Jerome answers? Comments there, please.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. I'll try to sum up the comments. We were basically talking about the question of what's inevitable in the future, how open is the future, what are the parts that can be influenced, what are the parts that can't. And we were perhaps a little bit kind of wondering about there's easily this kind of absence of actors in these accounts of technological development. It may be seen as this kind of almost automatic unfolding process, but we kind of believe that there are these, you need to think about agency and power and different actors and how that plays into interaction.
In that sense, the possibility of alternative futures in the context of activity of human beings, people.
Okay, one more perhaps, and then we.
My name is Christina from Open University, Hungary. Thank you for the presentation. It's very good. Because I have a PhD research in the field of human resources management. And my question is that you mentioned that the living cost will be lower. If we have technological development, robots and everything, it is high cost. And we have 25% of the inhabitants as unemployment. They have income, anything to buy the products. Then how we can explain that the living cost will be lower? Thank you.
So please.
Okay. On virtue. My undergraduate degree was in philosophy. Happy to talk about virtue. One, that we'll do that. We'll take that question. We'll put it into the next round of the scenarios and so forth. How that will play out, because we'll get feedback on the draft scenarios as well, so it can be in there and get feedback. My own take on that is that if you are, the virtue will be, well, what are you doing with your life? The discussion, I guess, maybe yesterday we had before about the good life, all that sort of stuff that Tom was talking about. That's what I said before, those philosophical questions now become quite real. So leading the virtuous life would be the virtue. Not necessarily earning a living is virtuous, but being virtuous. So it may be a self-identification and peer recognition of virtue. If you have freedom, what are you doing with that freedom? Are you just sitting on the beach with your feet up all day? Well, maybe that's not so virtuous. So that kind of conversation will come out. On the what can and cannot be controlled about the future, boy, that's a wide open question. You know, I don't, I can't give you any more wisdom on that than anybody else. You can certainly, and even analogies don't quite work, because if you go back to the agricultural age or the industrial age and you say, okay, what could we control and what we couldn't control? But we haven't had this business of a more intelligent species. Humans were still running humans, you know? So the past is not necessarily a great precedent here. But there's an old-fashioned statement about power. For example, are you right-handed? Are you right-handed or left-handed? You're right-handed? Left. Okay, then you put your right hand like that and put it back down. Okay. Now, I controlled that situation. It was an invention. It was a pure invention. No one gave me permission to do that. I did not apply for it. There was no call from the European Commission, right? It was just invented. So control may also be an invention, as power to some degree is an invention. If I didn't do that, I wouldn't have had that control for that moment. Now, of course, because he knows about the experiment, he won't let me do that again. Or you shouldn't let me do that again anyway. So on what we control and what we don't control, go back to the comment that I made earlier. This one of the key questions within the AI community now is ultimately that question about control. The control we would have in their minds is initial conditions of how the code and the approaches are made and the rules and so forth. That we can, at least we think we can control that. And then the theory is if we do that right, if we get that right, then we will have had control over the evolution. So if you use the tree as the analogy, we can certainly have the tree go a certain way. We can't control which leaf will turn which direction and so forth. I mean, you don't have total control over the tree. But you can have general control over that tree.
And there are examples. We have the stem cell research. We have legislation in some countries limiting it.
Right.
Which is a very strong instrument.
Yes.
We have more liberal solutions and more stricter
right.
solutions. And I think it's very important for politics that
Good.
in the context of this, you start to think about these alternatives.
Yep.
Because that's what politicians urgently need as early as possible. Some orientations, not only what the nice or not so nice issues will be, but some issues, something, right. What to do today
yep.
to be prepared.
Right. Good. So I hope you participate in Finland's workshop in the fall or spring or whenever it happens. And make sure that's on the agenda. You know, put that all on the agenda and have it circulated ahead of time so people think about these things before they come into meet. Yes. Now, having said that, and yes, we should do that, but having said that, I lived in a little country in the Caribbean called Dominica. Not the Dominican Republic, where 1/3 of my mail used to go, but Dominica. It's a little tiny country, 80,000 people between Guadeloupe and Martinique. Now, I can see little Dominica. If the world says you're not allowed to clone, Dominica goes, come on down, the weather's fine. You can clone here. So what happens if you do that? The whole world, everybody else has said it's against the law, they got the rules, it's all done. But not Dominica, maybe Switzerland too, we don't know. And so you go to Dominica, or Switzerland probably more expensive. You go to Dominica, and you get cloned, and it's a zygote at that point. Not a human, I mean, it's not, born, breathing, and so forth. And you take that state with you to maybe Switzerland. And then you take the next stage of its gestation before it's born, just before. Then you say, but I wanted it to be French. So we go over to Paris, and when it's born, All right? And then you come back to the United States, or in my case, come back to the United States. What's the citizenship of that being? They can either say that the United States said it's against the law to do this. And here I am coming back in with my clone. It's now a human being. It's maybe a couple days old or 10 days old or whatever, but it's a human being. Does it have rights? Is it a human? Is it a citizenship? Or is it a Dominican because that's where it was done? But it was born in Paris? Is it a French citizen? Now, that's just one of thousands of examples we can start to think about. So when you say, legislation rules, which you still got to do, I'm not knocking that, but you still got to answer yourself the question. Not all countries will follow all the same rules, I suspect. However, by having these different workshops and people sharing that stuff, at least they can address the question. How, if we're going to have control of this evolution in some way, how will that control really actually work? Especially when Dominique is over here saying, come on down, no problem, do your experiments here. And then there's going to be these wise guys that build these cities in the middle of the ocean. So who's in charge of those rules? I've always been surprised by the way that hasn't been done. There is a project in Los Angeles, I think you've probably heard this, it's Science Island or something. I don't know how far it's gotten, maybe somebody here knows about it. But the idea was to do all the experiments that were like illegal, so to speak. So you can skip regulation. So the idea of skipping regulation is an old-fashioned human thing. But you're right, it's the whole business about what you can control and what you can't control is humongously large and difficult. And the sooner we start thinking it through, better. Thank you. Okay, I got lost there, right? Oh, high cost, low income. Oh, that's right. So if everybody's unemployed, they can't buy all the stuff that the AI's made. Correctamundo. So everybody know the story about Henry Ford. He paid his employees higher than everybody else. And they said, what are you, crazy? What are you doing that? It's going to make your car too expensive. I said, no. The car will be able to be bought by my employees because they are paid high enough up. That's a lesson that not everybody has remembered, but it can be applied here. So if the guaranteed income is sufficient to purchase enough, there's also maybe a dynamic going on. And that is one of the issues in the study. I couldn't go through everything. But there may be a little bit of a mechanism. I don't think it's total, but little mechanism is if this oversupplies, clearly the cost goes down so they can afford. On the other hand, if they don't have enough income to be basic with it, then this can't produce anymore. So there may be a little balancing of that mechanism in there. Let's see. Oh, on high cost initial, yes, absolutely true. I mean, you buy a robot, it's expensive, right? But maybe not so much in the future. Because how is the robot made today? How is the robot going to be made in 2020, 2030, 2040, 2050? And furthermore, that's no longer a robot. It's going to be probably a synthesis of nanotech, nanorobotics, synthetic biology, artificial general intelligence. So it's no longer just a robot. So its capability of action is way beyond the actual robot. So the cost of that per unit of output will be different than we've experienced before. Like if you take the cell phone example, I use that because everybody's got one, right? You know, what's the cost of function? Well, part of it is camera. So that's part of that cost, right? Part of that is this, and you go through the whole list. Well, you make that whole list down there, and then they throw in all these applications. Well, the unit of cost of capability is probably under a penny. You know, I haven't done the math on it, but it's probably quite low. So a lot of the normal scales of thinking about these things, we have to rethink. But yes, your normal investments at this time within the short-term future are humongously large. And you can't buy them, you know, unless you are a major corporation, which is, you know, obviously who's doing it right now. A classic example is out of Maastricht in the Netherlands. There's a guy named Joost or Post or something like that. I forgot his name. He's a professor. Forgive me if he hears this. Great guy. He's produced the first hamburger a year and a half ago with genetic material without a cow. Now, the people who are negative on this said, oh, well, it cost $300,000 for a hamburger, for God's sake. Who the hell is going to pay $300,000 for a hamburger? Well, nobody. You know, it's just like the first satellite that went up cost a fortune. Government did that. Now, little countries are launching satellites or hiring somebody to launch them. The costs come down. The hamburger won't cost $300,000, $200,000, obviously. So these things will go through that normal, I think, through that normal sort of a curve thing. That the costs should go down and down and down. I mean, you can have some fun with it. Think of a particular technology and apply some of this stuff to it and see how that might change through time. And after a while, you go, wow, the cost is really going to eventually be pretty low. So if you have a business, you have to make a certain amount of money from those sales. But what happens if it's not your business anymore? Maybe it's AI's business, you know, 5th, 6th, 10th, 12th generation AI, who's actually making that product at a low cost. Well, maybe that thing doesn't need that much income for it, so you don't have to pay that much for it. These are all bizarre ideas. And it's just sort of exciting being futurists today on this kind of thing. Because before it's like, office automation, international affairs, but this stuff, right across the board, almost all your assumptions. Like, for example, take the normal assumption about means of production, right? Classic discussion in economics. What is the means of production? Well, if it's true that the internet is one of the largest, most effective means of production in the information economy, related to the other kinds of economies, in the history of civilization, who owns it? You got some state regulations, or attempted to be state regulations, but it's not owned. So non-ownership is a new factor in economics. We had state ownership, we got private ownership, we got group ownership, we got cooperative ownership, we got all kinds of ownerships. But non-ownership may be a major force in the future. How does that work out? So basically, I'm sharing with you my confusion. I don't have a clear answer to this, but I think that dynamic, though, between income and cost, because you can't produce 5,000 widgets if you got 2,000 people. So obviously you got to cut back, or you go to new products or something like that. So there will be a little bit of that mechanism at work, but I don't think it'll explain everything, but it'll be a factor. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I think we can now I wonder if there's still some others who want to share the discussion that you just had, or if somebody would like to elaborate on these three different points that we were just talking about. For me, for example, this virtue question really resonates well, because I'm not very technical, so some of these things go a little bit beyond my understanding, but I do, with the virtue thing, I connect work with happiness, actually. So now I'm looking at the future, that am I going to be happy? Because I know that I'm the kind of person who is very unhappy if I don't work all the time, and I can say, wow, today I did this and that and that. I need lists done. So,
yes.
So I am kind of now thinking here that what is the future without work? And I think happiness is something that also I know some people in this room have thought about these questions of everyday life. How is everyday life going to change?
I am guilty about not making a point here and making something clear, because there's confusion in language. Some people may make a distinction between work, job, and employment. Okay, right now you're employed by your country. And how well you do that is the virtue. Now, that's employment, where you're working for something, your employment. Job is what you are doing in that. But what happens if your job is self-actualization? Or, separating that out further, some others will say, really you're talking about work, you're not talking about a job, you're not talking about employment, you're talking about what's your life's work. So you're still, in some of these people's stuff, you still work. In fact, you may work many more hours. If you're your own, this self-employed people, you work more than the employees, right? So if you are defining your own work, if your life's work is to do X, or your life's work is to understand Y, that you're integrating work, play, leisure. all the time. Like right now, at this moment, am I playing a little bit? Yes, I'm a little playing. I'm doing this at leisure. It's also sort of the work that I do. We may be able to combine these things. So so you'll still be, at the end of the day, to say, oh my God, I did all this. But what you did may be more diverse than what you do today.
I work very hard on Sundays, more than at my office. So
you're more neurotic than most.
But please, I'm sure the audience now wants to comment on this topic or something else, or share what you just talked about. Timo, I'm waiting. Yes. Should we try with the microphone?
Aha. Good.
I'm not a specialist in artificial intelligence or any of these technologies, so my question might be silly. But I've been wondering about the limits of these technologies. I mean, what can they not do? Because it seems to me that in the future, we human beings will be working where these machines cannot work. And you were referring to the fact that somebody has to program these. And if we can, at least hopefully we'll have some intelligent people doing that who have a big heart and so forth. But just that pose some kind of a limit to what technology can do, because ultimately there has to be somebody to program them. And that programming assumes that the programmer has an understanding of what he wants to do, and she or she. And we're now living in a world where very often we don't know what to do, and we don't know where to go. So we're facing a sense-making challenge. And I'm just wondering that if we don't have enough frames in our everyday life at the moment, how come the programmers have the intelligence to program them right and replace all possible work?
Okay. Now, there's a lot of questions within those questions. So if I don't touch all of them, come back. One, on the business about limits. Let's roll our mind back a little bit to, say, 30, 40 years ago. Computers will never beat a chess champion. The younger people don't remember that's an issue, but those folks who have a little gray hair, remember that would never happen. It obviously happened. They said, well, yeah, but you can't do natural language, where you just ask any question, natural language, the computer can't. Along comes Watson and does it. As a matter of fact, by the way, I'm going to interrupt myself. We may do a control experiment on Watson. I did a little thing over the Swiss Embassy, and there's a guy from the National Science Foundation, and he says, you should have a control experiment. You've had all these futurists and people answer all these questions. Well, why not have some sort of control group or something? And I said, what would be a real control? I said, oh, Watson. Remember how Watson works. You feed Watson information, and and then you ask it a question. And it obviously did better than the others on that contest. But you could do what we're thinking about doing if IBM agrees with this. By the way, we have to go through a university. Hot tip. IBM has a program to go through universities to use Watson. So what I'm saying could be done here. And I know the head of the program of IBM. That's this guy we're talking about doing this thing. So the idea would be we would give all this data to Watson about jobs and technology and laws, all that sort of stuff. Just let him suck it all in. And then give him the questionnaire. Give him the questions. And Watson's got to answer them. And then Watson's got to comment on his own answer. No, we haven't done that, but that would be a cool experiment. Now, that's not to your question, but it just reminded me to share it with people. Because if we do that, that'll be very cool. It'll be like a control experiment with artificial intelligence, with intelligent people. Anyway, now, but back to the limits. So each time so far, we say technology won't be able to hit that limit. We go beyond it. So a trend forecast would be, well, we keep doing that, but there may be limits somewhere because all systems supposedly have limits. My guess, though, is a system may have a limit, but then that system becomes something else. Like, what's the limit of capability of a cell phone before it became smart? It had a limit. But now it's with throwing in apps. What's the limits to a cell phone? The limits become our imagination. So keep that in mind about limits. We got to be humble about limits. The limits may be further out there than we think is reasonable. And anyway, I think it's a good idea to posit that far out so that we don't get surprised by it. So if we're wrong, it's better to be wrong having thought about it than not. Now, back on the programmers. The programmers, I want to do an analogy on this. I've been relatively optimistic. Now I get a little pessimistic here. Programmers today, all the ones I know, are as good and virtuous as anybody around that I know of. I mean, they're asking questions about virtue that average folks haven't even begun to think about. And they are really seriously want to improve the human condition. I mean, everybody I know. I mean, I don't see anybody saying, well, I want to become a billionaire, fine. But if they don't become a billionaire, it's okay. I mean, it's that sort of silicon attitude. Okay, yeah, put my billions over there. I got something to do here. I got my work to do here. Now, here's the negative side. My first email was 1973. So I was part of the early community doing a lot of this sort of stuff. And the same attitude was then. All good people. I mean, really were good people. I would go to other countries. I'd call up then GT Telnet. You probably don't even remember what GT Telnet is. Anyway, they were the hot shots putting the equipment to make all this stuff later work. I'd say, hey, I'm going to country X. Who in that country know what the hell I'm talking about that I can get access through their telephone company? Says, oh, talk to Sam. And so it was this lovely, friendly community. We were all working together to hook up the world. And it was wonderful, and it was good, and it was lovely. And I'm embarrassed to say it never crossed my mind then that this would be used for organized crime, for pornography, for terrorism, for all that sort of stuff. And that's a really depressing, perception. Now this goes. The positive side is that if we can get that initial condition done in some way that ferrets out the abuse, because we never even thought of it as an issue when we were doing the early. We were just totally naive about human nature, because we're still not necessarily all nice people. So how can that initial conditions be worked out carefully so that it becomes in a good way? And they are thinking about this. I mean, they understand that's a serious issue. Because obviously we don't want to create a whole bunch of AI genius robot Hitlers. That's not an impossible future, I'm afraid to say. That's why I'm here today. And that's why we got to think it through together. But do keep in mind that people said, never beat a computer at chess. It'll never be able to do natural language. It'll never be able. I've done futures. You had an old resume, by the way. I've been doing this for more than 40 years. But anyway, it's okay. I'm glad I'd be younger than them. But every time something says X could not make it, it blasts right through. I mean, it's extraordinary what's going on today. It's just extraordinary. But that means our strong conversations are going to have to be extraordinary. All of us. Because one of the things I haven't mentioned is an individual, by 2050, an individual acting alone can make and deploy a weapon of mass destruction that could pretty well format the C drive of civilization. Now imagine what I said about artificial biology and 3D printing, because that can be biological printing, and knocking out viruses that are genetically programmed that can stay out, viruses can live outside the body for a bit. Bacillus doesn't do well, but viruses can do that for a while. And then give it all kinds of capabilities I don't want to go into. And then you, at leisure, put it around the world. And they have an incubation period, say 15 years. By the time it starts knocking people out, no way to trace it. So this is one of the most important security issues, I think, for the future. And the public has a role in this. You got governments will have technology that should be classified to detect and to deter. Mental health, we got to make people healthier because we want to reduce the number of wackos. The third one is us. The public will have a role in preventing this. Unlike the Cold War. The Cold War, the only role the public had was to pay taxes. And Finland, by God, you were smack dab in the middle of the thing. Sorry about that. But you had no role. I mean, you did okay. You had some financial transactions and so forth, but nevertheless, you didn't, the public didn't have a role. But preventing an individual, we call CMED, single individual massively destructive CMED, public has a role in that. That role has not been figured out. And people say, well, if you see something, say something. Yeah, right. That's going to help. It's going to reduce the problem a little bit, but it's not going to solve it. So there's some real negative stuff here. It's got to be thought through. I agree with you on that. That's a little sobering thought there. Yeah.
Other interventions here?
Yes, okay.
Okay, my name is Sirkka Heinonen and I'm from Finland Future Research Center. I'm co-chair of the Helsinki project. So, Jerome Glenn, thank you very much for this presentation. It was a fine opportunity for us to hear the first results of this Delphi or the Millennium project. I'd like to ask you about the big data, because big data seems to be the hot topic at the moment. So, what are your thoughts? What is the greatest challenge for us facing big data question? Is it the concept itself, what big data really is, what it could be, and how we could efficiently and very innovatively utilize or use big data, or what is the use for ordinary citizens?
Yeah.
Big data. Okay.
If I don't answer all the elements of that, interrupt me and make sure I do. So, by the way, if this workshop happens, this is the circus who you got to work with, and if it doesn't happen, this is the person to blame. Okay, but you got the interest of the Prime Minister's office, so it should happen anyway. And you're number 2 in the world, so it definitely should be a important one. Over the years of being aware of computer operations, I've come to the conclusion that there's always a way to outthink a system. And so I suspect that big data will become a lot bigger than we think, and that it will be shared more easily than we think, both legally and illegally. So the last part of your comment I like, and it's important for us. How does the individual use this? How does the individual, can we make software simple enough to an individual to have a focused AI, not a general, but a focused AI, to talk to you, to say, what do you want out of big data? So that you create your own algorithms. And as it returns information that's good here and not useful here, you're changing the algorithm. So that you don't have to be a super JavaScript writer and so forth, because it talks to you. And, so the idea is that everybody ought to tailor their relationship to big data. Now, right now, you got this big data and that big data. I think they're going to be interpermeable. I don't know how that can be prevented. I just don't know how it can be prevented. Because it's easier to figure out how to beat these systems than how to control them.
Okay. Well, thank you. We're now running out of, we're not running out of time, but it's closing to 3, and there's still more very interesting keynote speakers in the program. So, are there some pressing comments, questions? We can continue the discussion. I'm sure you can send comments, questions directly afterwards, or we'll continue in our next Foresight Friday. I'm sure you continue here at the university. So thank you very much for this very inspiring. I think we talked about so many things that I just have to go back to our the video and then see the things we talked about. That I got a lot out of this, a lot of new understanding, new ideas, and like we said, hopefully we'll be organizing some workshop Foresight Friday around this material later on this year, next year when it comes available. So thank you very much.
Thank you.